All right. Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. I'd like to call this meeting of the Transportation Committee to order. As a reminder, this meeting is being shared virtually through Zoom for those who can join us in the office and in person today, and is being recorded. Committee members, just remember, please turn on your microphone when speaking and announce your name for those online. It helps them virtually kind of tell who's talking. Before we begin, we do have a procedural matter. Voting members qualified to participate today remotely. We have Steve Travia with DuPage County, who requested to participate remotely in compliance with the requirements of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Also, sorry, oh yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. Skipped a step. Pardon, apologize. I'd like to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. I'll start this morning. Kevin Carrier with Lake County.
Amy Lee with CMAP.
Megan Swanson, IDOT.
Good morning, Heidi Lichtenberger representing Kendall County.
Christina Kapkowski, Will County.
Scott Hennings, McHenry County.
John Paul Depla, FHWA.
George Canethel on behalf of Kane County.
Audrey Winnick, Metropolitan Planning Council. Kara Bader, CTA.
Jeff Shriver, CDOT.
Grace Benninger, NERPC.
Eric Llewellyn, PACE.
David Kralik, Metro.
Kyle Whitehead, RTA.
Mayor Leon Rockingham, City of North Chicago, Council of Mayors.
Jack Cruikshank, Illinois EPA.
Karen Robles, Illinois Tollway.
Steve Schulke, IDOT Region 1.
Pam Jones, CNT.
Vicky Barrett.
Seems okay.
We'll go to the audience and then over to CMAP.
Blanca Vella Schneider, CMAP.
Terry Dixon, CMAP.
Todd Schmidt, FHWA.
Brian Larson, North Shore Council of Mayors.
John Hadsma, CMAP.
Brandon Gaber, IDOT.
Luca Batish, MCDOT.
Drew Duffin, McHenry County Council of Mayors.
Gretchen Klock, Kane Kendall Council of Mayors.
Eric Tronato, Northwest Municipal Conference.
Mike Clemens, Lake County Council of Mayors.
Joe Serdam, Lake County Council of Mayors.
Dennis Esquivel, EPA.
Russell Petroviak, CMAP staff.
John Carpenter, CMAP.
Alex Beata, CMAP.
Richard Norwood, CMAP.
This is Laura Wilkinson, and this whole corner is CMAP people, so I'm going to save them from saying CMAP. So it's Laura Wilkinson. Jen Miller.
Mike Sopchak.
Ryan Gugis. Vaz Boykowski.
Noah Harris.
Elizabeth Ginsburg. Sarah Stolpe. Kata Vasic.
Doug Ferguson.
Yeah. And then do we have anyone, Doug, on the Zoom call to? Okay. Gotcha. All right. Now back to what I was stating before I skipped a step was we do have some folks online that would like to participate remotely. Steve Travia with DuPage County has requested to participate remotely in compliance with the requirements of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. We do have Dave Kralik with us from Metro, but he has to leave for a business reason around 9:55. So Brian Stepp with Metro also has a qualifying reason and would take over for David once he leaves. So with that, if we have a motion to approve that remote participation.
So moved, Mayor Rockingham.
Yeah, Mayor Rockingham, second by Scott, McHenry County. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Moving on to item 2, agenda changes and announcements. We do not have any agenda changes today. Do we have any announcements from committee members? All right, seeing none. Moving to item 3, approval of the minutes. We have before us draft meeting minutes from both our September 13th and our October 25th meetings. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes? Mayor again? Motion.
Second.
Karen with a second. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, item 4, CMAP update. We have with us today Amy Lee, who's going to provide the update for CMAP. Thank you.
Okay, before we get into our regular updates, I'm going to hand things over to Erin Alleman, Executive Director of CMAP.
Thanks. Good morning. It's good to see you all on Friday morning. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context here related to some of the things going on in relationship to contracting work and disadvantaged business enterprise. Now, I'm not an attorney. I am not, part of the lawsuit that's going on, but I was at Hessia last night moderating a panel of IDOT, Tollway, CDOT, and Cook County. And this was a big topic of discussion. And so I just wanted to provide a couple bullets of information that I learned last night. I know that the counties are working with their legal teams as well, but essentially there was a court case in Kentucky where a number of firms sued saying that that there should be no DBE, disadvantaged business requirements based on race or gender. And the federal court that this went to agreed with them. And what has been put in place right now is that 23 states or 21 or 23 states that all have these programs, there's an opportunity for these companies to come and say, I was going to bid on that work. I am a national firm and therefore this should apply in all of the states that I might want to do business in. Illinois is one of those states that some of these firms do business in. And so they're, based on the information that the Secretary Osmond shared with us last night, is that they have had contact. So essentially what's supposed to happen is a agreement gets posted. There is 5 days where the company can say, hey, I want to come in and bid on this, and they have to go to FHWA, and then FHWA reaches back out to the DOT, and the DOT then has to remove the DBE goals from the contract and repost it. I think that it's too early to tell what implications this could have, broad-ranging or not, on other work, but recognizing that this is related to federal funds and specifically construction funds. And so I know that many of you play in this space and you all have strong DBE programs and MBE and WBE, but it's specifically focused on the construction side at the moment. And, recognizing that a lot of our projects here are matched 80-20, 20% local funding, 80% federal funding. And so that's a large chunk of funding to come up with. So I don't have any answers. I am happy to hear your questions that you might have, but I just wanted to let you know that we as an agency are paying close attention to this. I know that the counties have also been paying close attention to this. Deputy Governor Scudder was at the meeting last night and reiterated and reinforced the governor's commitment to DBE programs and diversity in transportation and all of the sectors that they work in. Again, a little bit above my pay grade in terms of how this moves forward, but I wanted to just proactively share that with you all here this morning, that we don't have any answers, but we will continue to monitor and work with our partners at both the state and federal levels to make sure that we are keeping you abreast of information as it becomes available. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for letting me butt in.
All right, thank you, Erin. Some other updates we'd like to provide for you all. We're nearing the end of the year, so for me and the CMAP team, that means we want to start looking ahead to 2025. This committee comes together and certainly CMAP sits in a place of trying to develop agenda items for us to discuss, but certainly that agenda is set by you all too. And so if you have topics that you would like for us to broach and to discuss together in 2025, please be in touch with me, Vicki, or Doug, and we'll try to make sure that we get you on the agenda for next year. Next, some recent CMAP engagements. You might hear bits and pieces of CMAP in the news and things like that. Just want to round that out a little bit with an understanding of where we've been. CMAP attended the Federal Highway Administration's annual senior leadership meeting held in Chicago. The team engaged with FHWA managers from across the country about our local federal partnership and priority transportation investments in our region. Then another bit here, Vicki Barrett and Lindsay Bailey were featured speakers at the Illinois Institute for Transportation Engineers luncheon. There they shared a lot of the work that you've seen in this committee on speed management and the county safety action plans. Vicki's also been out there meeting with councils of mayors, getting that information out to them as well. CMAP was excited to welcome the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus Foundation to our offices to discuss the importance of investing in a robust transit system and to facilitate a conversation with those community-based organizations about the opportunities that transit can bring to their communities. On that transit note, Aaron Alleman also presented the Plan of Action for Regional Transit to ACEC at the Illinois Chapters Conference in Springfield, as well as to the Land Economic Society for the Chicago region this week. I likewise had the opportunity to speak to our work in the PART report with the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations Conference this past September in Salt Lake City. Clearly, a lot of other regions facing similar issues as we are when it comes to transit. And lastly, just this week, CMAP launched its regional ADA coordinators groups as the latest step in our multi-year accessibility program to communities. This group is connecting ADA coordinators from across our region with resources and training, as well as opportunities to learn from each other. If you want more information on that, please feel free to reach out and we can provide you with more information. Next topic here, federal funding programs. As many of you know, CMAP, we facilitate 4 federal funding programs: the Carbon Reduction Program, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, the Surface Transportation Shared Fund, and the locally programmed Transportation Alternatives. These programs fund projects aimed at reducing emissions, improving traffic congestion, enhancing regional transportation infrastructure, and supporting non-motorized transportation. The call for projects is open. It's open right now. It does close on December 20th. Say that again, it closes on December 20th. If you get your application in sooner, that helps us a lot. More than $385 million is available in this go-round. A few weeks ago, CMAP staff, they held an informational webinar on the call for projects. I believe it is recorded and is still on the webpage for you to check out if you need additional information. And then, let's see. This is important. Actually, before I get to that, there's one bullet that I left off, so I apologize for that. On the legislative front, we kind of took this out of the regular agenda, but wanted to give you all an update. CMAP's Intergovernmental Affairs team is in the process of developing our 2025-26 federal and state advocacy agenda. This is a document that we update every 2 years through the lens of our ON-TO 2050 and the strategic direction guidance. The agenda outlines CMAP's key policy priorities to help advance our regional goals. We use this agenda as a tool to inform policymakers and elected officials with concrete and tangible actions that can affect change. And to keep you informed throughout this process, our team will come back to you to present this agenda right after CMAP's board approves it in January. Last but not least, as a lot of you know, CMAP is largely funded through US DOT federal metropolitan planning funds, which requires a 20% local match. CMAP relies heavily on local contributions from IDOT, from our region's counties and municipalities, as well as our transportation partners to make that match. Not only is this about not leaving federal dollars on the table as we try to make this match, but it's also about making sure that the local contribution represents the region and holds CMAP accountable to representing the wide range of needs in the region. So we are asking you to please keep your eyes out. We did send out annual invoices to you all. We want to just thank you in advance of your continued commitment and appreciate you being in touch with us if you have any questions on that. I think that concludes my updates. I just want to give, maybe switching gears here, if you take a look at your agenda, you can see for today we'll be talking about some pretty important topics: roadway safety, congestion management, and resilience of our infrastructure to climate change. These are all topics that will inform our continued effort to develop the regional transportation plan. So as staff come and present and seek your input on that, please engage and understand how you want those topics to better inform our RTP development process. Okay, with that, I'll turn things back over to the chair.
Thank you, Amy, for those updates. Moving to item 5.01. Russell's with us today, and he's going to provide an overview of the fiscal year 2023 through 2028 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Good morning, Russell.
Thank you. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 149 tip changes contained in formal tip amendment 25-02 and the 140 tip changes contained in administrative amendments 25-02.1 and 25-02.2. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in an increase of just over $279 million in total project costs for all prior, current, and future years. Here are a few of the highlights. IDOT recently awarded the first round of federal National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funding, NEVI. 11 projects in our region were awarded these funds and are added to the TIP in this amendment. The EW2 Create project, which is part of the larger 75th Street Corridor Improvement Project, added $14 million in right-of-way funds to further advance that project. And IDOT added just a little over $30 million to repair and replace 11 bridges and resurface portions of Illinois 53. So those are some of the major highlights. Administrative amendments added $141.7 million to the TIP in all prior, current, and future years. The net change for total cost in the TIP from all amendments resulted in $420.7 million being added to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. As shown in the memo, new projects and projects moving funding into or out of the FFY 25 to 29 TIP comprised most of the formal changes, while administrative amendments were primarily schedule changes, updates to letting schedules, things of that nature, and cost changes below our formal thresholds. Accounting for the amendments presented to you today, the TIP remains fiscally constrained. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on November 15th for committee and public review. Approval of formal TIP Amendment 25-02 is requested, and I can answer any questions if there are any at this time.
All right, thank you, Russell. Before we do ask for questions, we could do a motion in a second. Get it on the floor. Do I have a motion to approve TIP Amendment 25-02?
So moved. So moved.
Heidi?
Second, David Graylick.
David, thank you. All right, any questions or discussion for Russell? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Russell. Appreciate it. All right, Vicki is here with us and she'll provide an overview of the federal safety targets for the new roadway safety targets for 2025. So, morning, Vicki.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here for my annual presentation on the roadway safety targets. We're looking at 2025 targets today. And as always, I like to begin this presentation with saying that CMAP is committed to reducing traffic fatalities to zero, as described in our On to 2050 plan. This means making our roads safer for all users, regardless of age, ability, race, income, or mode of travel. CMAP's target program has been in place since 2018, and to date, the targets related to traffic fatalities have not been met. This is not an acceptable outcome, and there is no number of traffic fatalities that we find acceptable We are in the process, and we've presented to this committee throughout the year, a process dedicated to improving regional traffic safety in our STAR program. I'll talk a little bit more about that later today. But our intention is to move as fast as possible towards implementation of many of our safety programs so that we can not only meet targets, but continue our goal of reaching zero. So for today, let's see, come down a little. Here's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give a quick overview of the safety targets and their approval process. I will present to you the 2025 draft roadway safety performance targets. I will make some recommendations for approval that represent the findings of staff, and then we'll talk briefly about next steps. First, a quick overview of the Safety Targets program. The safety targets are part of FHWA's Transportation Performance Management Program, which is called TPM. It is a required reporting program that asks states to report on a number of assets and conditions, such as bridge condition, pavement condition, and safety is one of those. The goal of the TPN program is to inform investment decisions and guide progress, track and guide progress towards important goals such as roadway safety. MPOs have been required to identify targets since 2018. As I mentioned earlier, we have the option of supporting state targets, which is what we have done since the inception of the program. And we can also identify regional targets, which I'll talk about a little bit later. They are set annually. We receive the targets from IDOT in late summer, early fall, and we have 180 days to approve them ourselves. The process to approve targets looks like this. As I mentioned, we received the targets in September we received them in September of 24, this past September. And we are presenting them for you here today for your approval. And they will then go to our board and MPO committees in January of next year. There are 5 federal performance measure safety targets. 1 is the number of fatalities. 2 is the rate of fatalities per vehicle mile traveled. 3 is the number of serious injuries. 4 is the rate of serious injuries per vehicle mile traveled. And the 5th one is the number of combined non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So I will now share with you what the targets are as identified by IDOT for 2025. This is a table that has a lot of numbers on it. I will go through each of these in a little bit more detail next. A couple things to know. The targets are based on a 5-year rolling average for the most recent year that has available data. These targets were actually identified a little bit earlier this year, which means that they are still based on the 2022 5-year rolling average. So the 2025 targets represent, in the case of fatalities, for example, a 2% annual reduction since 2022 for the number of fatalities. I'll explain this more in charts next. So there are 2 different methods for setting this year's targets. When trends are going upward, IDOT has a policy of identifying a 2% policy-based reduction in the number of fatalities. The number of fatalities has been trending up until 2021, and since 2021 has been trending downward. However, the 5-year rolling average continues to have an upward trend because of the high number of fatalities in 2021 and 2022. That will likely start to level out in the next year as we are able to actually add in years with declining fatalities. So the statewide fatalities target for 2025 is 1,099.5, which, as I mentioned earlier, represents a 2% policy-based reduction beginning in 2022 and then 2% down in 2023 2023, 2% down in 2024, and again, 2% down in 2025. For those of you that actually want to do the math like I wanted to do. The second target is the statewide rate of fatalities per VMT. As discussed, the number of fatalities in our state and in our region and in our country was trending upward since 2014, peaked in 2021, despite a drop in actual VMT during the COVID-19 pandemic, which has created an upward trend in the rate of fatalities. And the 2025 target for the rate of fatalities is 1.083. Again, based on a 2% policy-based reduction. The third target is statewide serious injuries. Serious injuries, in contrast to fatalities, have been trending downward, indicating that crashes have become more serious to create more fatalities. It is a complex phenomenon that I think we're all trying to understand a little bit better. Because this is a downward trending pattern, a different method of identifying the target was used, which is a regression analysis or least squares method, which created a target for 2025 of 7,816.8. The fourth target is the rate of serious injuries per VMT, similar to serious injuries. This is a downward trend at the moment, and a least squares regression analysis was used to identify this target of 8.046 in 2025. The non-motorized fatal and serious injuries are a combination of bicycle and pedestrian crashes that are both fatal and serious. So embedded in this performance measure are multiple trends. And it just so happens that those trends are going in different directions, similar to what I just showed you about fatalities and serious injuries. Fatalities among non-motorized crashes are increasing, while serious injuries are decreasing slightly. For this reason, the 2025 target used two different methods of identifying this target: a 2% policy-based reduction on the fatalities, plus a least squares method regression analysis for the serious injuries. It's a mouthful. That identifies the 2025 target at 1,332.4. As I presented last fall, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we are in the process of moving towards regional targets. I'll talk about those more in a minute. But for today, our recommendation for 2025 is to support the targets identified by IDOT in this, as summarized in this chart. Of course, CMAP continues, as you've heard throughout the year, we continue our work toward the goal of zero traffic deaths in our region by 2050. And before we get to approval of these targets or a motion for approval, I want to just talk for a minute about this idea of regional targets, which I presented on last fall. We presented a kind of history of targets and also a look forward. Our intention is to identify regional targets as soon as we are confident in a data-driven methodology that is informed by a plan of action. That plan of action is currently being generated in our regional safety planning effort that is part of the STAR program and funded by the federal Safe Streets and Roads for All program. In the meantime, we also intend to align the identification of regional targets with the timing of our regional transportation plan, and again, with the completion of our regional safety action plan. In the meantime, we are asking for a motion to approve the targets. I will pass it to you, or entertain any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Oops, sorry. Thank you very much, Vicki. Great presentation. We'll get this on the floor first, so I will entertain a motion to approve the 2025 roadway safety targets.
Motion to approve RTA.
Kyle, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Karen Polway.
Thank you, Karen. All right. Any questions or discussions on this topic? Check. Go ahead.
Just had a quick question. You mentioned that STAR will be producing new regional targets. Are there any current regional targets on the MPO level?
No, we have not identified any regional targets at this point.
Okay. And I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning the drive to get to zero. That's all I've got. Thanks.
All right. Anything else? All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Vicky. All right, moving on, as Amy alluded to, we have a couple here upcoming big picture type of things, some good presentations that CMAP staff will be providing for us. So definitely looking forward to some good discussion on this. Any questions and stuff you guys may have. The first item is 6.01. Noah will be with us today to provide an overview on the congestion management and the process for establishing congestion management strategies. So good morning, Noah.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Noah Harris, and today I'll be giving a presentation on the congestion management strategy. By the end of this overview presentation, I'll have covered why we're doing this project and how it's connected to our federal requirements. We'll step through those various required components, and then I'll talk a bit about how we're setting the foundation for future planning work to support the implementation of the strategies after the completion of this stage of the project. So I want to start out by just clarifying some terminology here. So the congestion management strategy is the name of the current initiative to comprehensively update the region's congestion management process. So the congestion management process, on the other hand, is just the technical name of the federally required transportation planning activity. And something I want to emphasize here at the outset is that the congestion management process is meant to be an ongoing transportation planning activity, which is why it's specifically called a process as opposed to something like a plan. And we've included reference to Go to 2040 on the slide here because the region's current CMP documentation dates from 2013, which is one of the main reasons, but not the only reason why we're going through this comprehensive update. Next slide. So digging in a little bit more, what is the congestion management process? Federal regulations establish the CMP as a required component of regional transportation planning for urbanized areas with populations over 200,000. Those regulations lay out the required components that should make up the CMP, and they also draw connections to other regional transportation planning and programming requirements. The Federal Highway Administration provides what I think is the most useful definition of the CMP, which is a systematic and regionally accepted approach for managing congestion that provides 1, information on system performance, and 2, that assesses strategies that meet state and local needs. So most of the required CMP components seem to fit into one of those 2 buckets, either activities related to information on system performance or activities related to the assessment of strategies. CMAP has continuously met these federal requirements through various staff level activities. And through this update, we'll refresh each component of the CMP, but we're particularly excited to focus on developing the strategy side of this function, ultimately working towards a cohesive regional strategy to address congestion while also prioritizing consideration for human-centered mobility. So we're guided by questions that aren't just focused on where is the congestion and how do we want to manage it, but more broadly, is the system working for people? Are people able to move around the region and access the destinations in the ways they want and need to? Slide. So as Amy alluded to earlier, how does the congestion management process fit into the 2026 Regional Transportation Plan update? There are 2 key points I want to make here. First is that the federal regulations for the CMP actually identify specific connections to the RTP, stating that the measures and the strategies that we identify there can feed directly into the regional transportation plan. And second, another piece I want to emphasize is that the CMP should be both informed by and aligned with all of our regional transportation planning goals, not only those goals focused on congestion. So if we go to the next slide, and as you've seen this slide in previous presentations, these are the preliminary goal areas guiding the regional transportation plan update. And as you can imagine, the CMP is most directly connected to the goal of increasing mobility and accessibility on the top there. However, congestion management is relevant to so many of the other goals here, and approaching congestion management without also considering goals related to safety or climate or environmental justice, for example, might lead to different approaches and different strategies that we take as a region to manage congestion. So transitioning into the components that make up the CMP, FHWA has guidance documentation that outlines what they call the 8-step process model for congestion management. And those 8 steps are to develop regional objectives, define the network, develop multimodal performance measures, collect data and monitor system performance, analyze congestion problems and needs, identify and assess strategies, program and implement strategies, and finally evaluate strategy effectiveness. We'll go through these in greater detail in the coming slides, but generally I just want to highlight that those first 5 steps fit into the system performance bucket of the definition, and the last 3 really fit into the strategy assessment bucket of the definition. And those last 3 will be a primary focus for the team in the coming months. Next slide. So the first step we took when we started this initiative was to establish a resource group whose purpose is to guide the comprehensive update. The resource group is made up of representatives from throughout the region who bring both technical and policy perspectives to help shape both the data and strategy components of the CMP. The group is primarily made up of representatives from state and federal agencies, county departments of transportation, transit agency representatives, and other non-governmental and civic organization representatives. From there, one of the first steps in the process is to define the CMP network, which establishes the geographic area of application and the transportation system components to which the congestion management process applies. And so for our region, the CMP applies to the 7-county metropolitan planning area, and the network includes critical components of the regional transportation system, such as the national highway system and intermodal connectors, the transit network, the freight rail network, and bicycle and pedestrian networks. Next are the CMP objectives and performance measures. So the objectives should establish the desired outcomes to be achieved through the congestion management process. And for the CMP, they'll generally be connected to addressing congestion and improving mobility, as we've said, and the performance measures, which are ideally directly associated with each of these objectives, will support the measurement of congestion and system performance. And these are essential components of a data-driven, performance-based approach to congestion management. These are the preliminary CMP objectives based on the first set of resource group meetings and based on additional stakeholder outreach we've conducted. And while they're still in development, we wanted to provide them here to paint a picture of the types of objectives we're headed towards for this process. So as you can see, some examples are enhance equitable access to jobs and destinations, enhance transit and active transportation, improve reliability for all modes, optimize operations, and so on. All of these are directly relevant to congestion management, but with a heavy emphasis on human-centered mobility. And each of these will have associated performance measures to help us understand our performance across the objectives. So with the objectives and the measures and the network established, the next step will be to establish the process to analyze congestion. So this step is seeking to answer the question, what are the congestion problems in the region? This process will use data and the performance measures to identify where the problems are and what's causing them, So is it signals? Is it incidents and response times? Is it flooding? Is it lack of travel options, et cetera? And additionally, this process will set the foundation for the evaluation and ranking of priority corridors. So in other words, identifying where we as a region most need to plan for and implement the congestion management strategies at the corridor level. And with the process to analyze congestion established, the next major step will be to establish the process to identify and apply and evaluate strategies. For this piece, we've studied the federal guidance, the historical evolution of this process, and peer MPO practices to develop an understanding of what this might look like. And recognizing that we have limited funding and that we won't be able to build our way out of congestion, we hope to establish a strategy assessment process that meets a couple pieces here, contributes to meeting the CMP objectives and regional transportation planning goals, a process that supports fiscal constraint by helping to identify cost-effective congestion management strategies, and a process that's flexible enough to consider local context, helping to identify strategies that are right-sized to the context of a given corridor. On the screen here are two of the peer MPO examples that we've reviewed, demonstrating options for the types of approaches we could establish for the strategy assessment step. On the left, Southern California Association of Governments has what they call a mobility pyramid. So towards the bottom of the pyramid are system monitoring and evaluation and maintenance and preservation. And working upwards from there, the pyramid includes strategy types like smart land use and demand management, ITS and incident management, and operational improvements. And finally, the top of the pyramid concludes with system completion and expansion. So these strategy types are organized in a way that encourages consideration first of those strategies that are likely to be most aligned with the regional transportation planning goals, and that might be more cost-effective to implement, considering limited funding before considering those strategies that might be more expensive or more complex or more or less aligned with the planning goals. And on the right, the Met Council has what they call their congestion management toolbox. Working from top to bottom this time, the toolbox recommends strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, strategies to shift single occupancy vehicle trips to other modes and to HOV trips where possible, and strategies to move to improve operations before finally considering capacity expansion. The federal regulations for strategy assessment lay out a similar tiered approach like this, and we'll look to develop an approach similar to these, but that's uniquely tailored to the needs of our region, as SCAG and Met Council have done for their regions. So this project will result in two primary deliverables that will be available to the region and the partners to support implementation. One is a CMP guidebook, and the second is a comprehensive corridor study template. So the guidebook will lay out the suite of options for congestion management strategies, and it will provide guidance on the process to assess right-sized strategies, such as those examples we looked at the previous slide. And the corridor study template will establish a framework for regional collaboration, emphasizing multi-jurisdictional and multi-agency coordination for the planning and the implementation of those strategies with a focus at the corridor level. And finally here, looking at the timeline and next steps, we launched the resource group this past summer and are in the process of establishing the objectives and the network and the performance measures. We previewed some of that. And next year, we'll shift to focus on establishing the process to analyze congestion and on developing the guidebook and the corridor study template. And once those processes are established and those resources are available, we will begin the corridor evaluations, working towards a suite of evaluated and ranked corridors by the end of next year. And we'll return to the committee next year once we've made more progress, seeking feedback on the updated CMP components. And with that, hopefully that was a helpful overview. Thanks for the time and happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Noah. That was great. I appreciate the time and the presentation. Any questions or discussion items for Noah?
Noah, thanks for your presentation. When I think about some of the strategies that we've already employed in the region, I think about IDOT's bus on shoulder work. Lake County has a very impressive operations center. And Tollway continues to expand their smart road systems. It feels like there's a lot of good work going on. I know there's a lot of conversations still to be had about what is good congestion and what is bad congestion and what do we want to combat. But there's a lot of good work already going around this, and I'm hoping that through this process, we can start to chart a future for our region around these strategies.
Kyle.
Yeah, just kind of building on that. RTA has been part of the resource group, and I just wanted to say to Noah and the project team, I think you all have done a great job and been responsive to the feedback the group has given and really focused. I think a lot of the feedback has been on looking to improve mobility for all users and not just focused on reducing travel time for cars and thinking about different ways we can do that. So it has been an open and inclusive process so far. So I look forward to this result and then carrying that over into the RTP.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. Audrey.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's been a really great multimodal discussion. Can you remind us to what extent these corridor analyses will generate project recommendations and potentially cost estimates as a result?
Yeah, good question. So once we've established the process, that key next step is really just to do the corridor evaluation. So identifying where do we most want to apply the congestion management strategies, and that would lead potentially to corridor planning. So it's in the corridor planning where those types of questions would be answered. So I think those are future planning and implementation phases. This project is really focused on establishing those processes and developing those planning resources.
Awesome. I do have a couple quick process questions, Noah. The timing of this, it looks like it's kind of aligning with the RTP and all that. Is the vision that some of these strategies and stuff that come out of that kind of feed in and dovetail into the RTP?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say yes. Yeah, we wanted to set up the timeline of this project so we would have the guidebook and the corridor template and the process to assess strategies to then feed into and inform the RTP. So some of those strategy specific things, the types of strategies and the process to analyze strategies will absolutely inform the approach in the RTP. Yeah.
Great. And then kind of building on that too is I think you mentioned that this was last done in 2013, 2014, though it's like an ongoing kind of just process type of thing. But is there any like firm triggers for updating this? Like, is it when we update the long range plan, or is it just kind of when it seems out of date, and or is there anything in like statute or anything like that, or?
Yeah, that is a good question that I will have to look into and get back to you. But because we've met the regulations and it's an ongoing process, we really just wanted to use this opportunity to refresh each step, even though we've continued to meet the regulations. But I can look into that.
Yep, sorry for the Friday stumper. Any other questions or comments for Noah? All right, thank you. And I'll just say, echoing on what Kyle and Audrey said too, this has been a great process and it's a challenge. All the stuff that you guys do, it's a pretty broad region, right? So from corner to corner, congestion strategies and safety and all that kind of stuff just vary. I mean, it's all, the city of Chicago is different than McHenry County and things like that. So I appreciate all the work you guys have put into it and looking forward to continuing that. So, all right, thank you, Noah. Moving on, we got Kate is with us today, who's going to give an update on the transportation resilience work and the completion of vulnerability assessment coming out of the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here to update you on the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, or TRIP as we're calling it. And I'm really excited because we've just hit a major milestone, having completed the first climate vulnerability assessment of the regional transportation system for this region. And this work was directly recommended in ON2 2050. And it's very important to CMAP as it's going to inform the regional transportation plan, influence resilience policy, planning, and programming, and provide data and tools to regional partners, including all of you, hopefully here today. Next slide, please. So the goal of the trip is to identify opportunities to improve the resilience of the transportation network to flooding, heat waves, and other extreme weather and climate change impacts. Developing this plan will help us take steps toward moving towards building a more resilient transportation system and resilient communities that are better equipped to withstand the storms that we experience today, as well as those that we'll experience in the future. And it's also important because this plan will meet FHWA's Protect program requirements for a resilience improvement plan, which will position the region to compete for Protect funds as well as other resilience grants. And we're not doing this alone. Our consultant team led by ICF has really been instrumental in crafting this work. So I want to touch on the different aspects of this project. And when we say transportation network, what we really mean by that. We are taking a comprehensive view. We want to look at not just risks and improvements needed to infrastructure, but also service operations and user experience. Climate change impacts all of these aspects of our transportation network, and therefore we need to be proactive about building resilience across the board. The plan seeks to increase resilience in 4 main ways. First, by identifying and prioritizing those major transportation assets in the region that are vulnerable to extreme weather and climate change. Then using that information to identify and prioritize infrastructure investments to build resilience and reduce climate risks. We want to ensure that the investments and other improvements that we propose in this plan can drive equitable and just outcomes in communities that have been overburdened by climate impacts and underserved by the transportation system. And finally, informing the process by which transportation projects get developed, get designed, get funded, so that they actively build resilience and contribute to the solution and not the problem. The first phase in developing the plan is to assess climate risks and vulnerabilities of the transportation system. And what's important to emphasize with this assessment is that it is forward-looking. This isn't a hazard mitigation plan that we've taken on. And so what I mean by that is that the goal is to understand which hazards will be made worse by climate change so that we can really focus our efforts on what we need to do or change to adapt. We conducted the assessment following these 5 steps. I'll quickly walk through them here. First thing we did was we evaluated recent trends and latest projections to understand what climate change will look like in the region. Next, we applied those findings and looked at a system level assessment to really identify which components of the transportation system are most likely to be impacted by climate related events. So this means we looked at roads, bridges, or transit as a whole to understand those impacts. Then we used a data-driven process to identify where transportation assets and climate risk are distributed across the region. And then finally, we looked more closely at heat impacts to transit riders to identify locations or routes where riders are at greatest risk. Lastly, we're currently in the process of estimating the economic impacts of flooding on roads. And through this, we're really trying to monetize the impacts of passenger, freight, and transit delays. And we expect to have findings to share early next year. Just looking back at our timeline, this assessment has been in the works for some time now. It's probably why I feel so good to be here finally sharing the results with you today as we began back in early 2023. But since then, we've been collaborating with agencies and advocates in the transportation, emergency management, and stormwater fields through our project steering committee, as well as larger stakeholder workshops that we've held. And many of you personally or your colleagues have dedicated time and data and expertise to this work, and we're really grateful for your continued participation as we move towards developing the plan in this next year. Okay, so what did we find? I know this isn't a big revelation at all for really anyone in this room, but it's important for us to affirm that flooding poses the biggest threat with current and future impacts to really all aspects of the transportation system, including infrastructure, service, and users. Climate models show that the trend of more heavy and frequent rainstorms will unfortunately continue, and therefore we need to be prepared. Specifically, of the road miles that we studied, 34% have high or very high risk, meaning that they could experience up to 2 or more feet of flooding during a 500-year flood event. What is a 500-year flood event? Those are those really, really major storms that really have a 1 in 500 chance of happening in a given year. Bus stops are also vulnerable, with 64% of CTA stops and 47% of PACE stops exposed to flooding, which makes sense when you look at the impacts to roads and where those stops are located. When looking at the region's commuter rail, 36% of CTA stations and 31% of metro stations are at risk of flooding. And lastly, 61% of regional trails are at high or very high risk, which isn't too surprising since we know that many of these trails are found along waterways. Looking at roads a bit more closely, this map on the right shows roads with high and very high flood risk for the region. And you can see that the most urban areas have the highest risk. So this includes Chicago, suburban Cook, as well as Aurora, Elgin, Joliet, and Waukegan. This is also shown where looking at the breakdown of percent miles by county shown in the table here, where we see Cook County has the highest percentage at 44%. But then really all other counties except for Kendall having at least 25% of road miles assessed with falling within the high or very high risk categories. And clearly there are non-urban area flooding challenges as well, as you can also see in the map here. We also found that extreme heat will become an increasing threat for our region. Climate models are showing that annual days with average temperatures over 95 degrees will increase from 2 days historically to 18 days by 2050. So some of you may be thinking, well, we have way more than 2 days a year with temperatures above 95 degrees. But what this analysis is showing is that the number of days where the average temperature across the entire time of the entire day itself is at or above 95 degrees. So these are those very, very hot, sweltering days. And what this map shows us is that across the region, the number of extremely hot days will increase. But you can see in the shades of brown or dark orange that the greatest increases are going to be in the central part of the region as well as the southwest portion of the region. Lastly, we wanted to look at how extreme heat would impact transit riders. And we focused on transit riders for this assessment for 2 reasons. First, we knew that extreme heat doesn't impact people equally. And second, transit riders are particularly vulnerable since they're more exposed to the elements, having to get to your stop, wait there, and then get to your final destination. And we also know that some riders don't have access to other modes to get to where they need to go. So to understand heat vulnerability for this assessment, we looked at exposure to extreme temperatures using the data in the map that I just shared. We looked at social and health vulnerability data provided by USDOT. And then we also looked at conditions at the stop or station itself, like tree shade, wait times, and some other data points. And so when accounting for these risk factors, we found that more than half of bus stops and rail stations across the region have high or very high transit rider vulnerability. Urban areas of the region demonstrate higher vulnerability than non-urban areas, with higher concentrations in Chicago South and West Sides, which aligns with long-standing inequities in marginalized and underinvested communities. I'm excited to announce again that we have data available today on the CMAP website for download, for viewing on a web map, and also the risk-based vulnerability assessment report itself and executive summary, because the report is admittedly long. But the data available is extensive. We casted a wide net for this assessment, and so we have the data to prove it. And so this is what we published from this first vulnerability assessment that we've developed for the region, which is exciting. So lastly, I just want to speak to how this data can be used and where we're headed with this. So it can be used in many different ways. First and foremost, we're going to be using this data to directly inform the project list and prioritization in the TRIP or TRIP. The data can also support funding applications, and this includes FHWA's Protect discretionary grants, which is open now, as I'm sure several of you know, and it closes on February 24th of next year. We are also using the data to evaluate projects submitted in this current year open call for STP shared fund projects. And so that's why we really want to get the web map out there for different project sponsors to review. And we encourage partners to incorporate this data into your project selection processes as well. The data can also, I should say the data and the eventual projects that end up in TRIP can help inform long-range planning across the region as well. And I'll speak to just a minute about how we're going to do that by integrating this work with the RTP. And then lastly, it can be used in a whole host of local planning activities, and we're excited to also use the data to inform our local planning efforts as well. So looking at the work that lies ahead over the next year, we'll continue to work with our steering committee, with other stakeholders, and we'll be coming back to this committee as we develop the plan. In the first half of next year, we're going to be soliciting projects to include in the plan. And this is going to be important to support eligibility for the Protect program and the reduced match that projects in the TRIP can qualify for. But we also want to use this process not just narrowly looking at the Protect program, but to more broadly identify regional priorities for transportation investments. We'll also be developing a range of transportation-related resilience strategies and practices to recommend in the plan. These will likely cover resilience performance measures and targets, design considerations, policy-based actions like land use recommendations, as well as asset management, and some things that are admittedly not on this list. And then given the timing of this project, to create a plan by the end of next year, we're really well aligned to influence the RTP. Now with our vulnerability assessment behind us, we can really focus our efforts on how we incorporate these findings and recommendations into the regional transportation plan. And so this includes using the risk data to help evaluate the regional capital projects, as well as feeding into the CMP corridor prioritization process of development that Noah just described. And, you know, again, in general, given the importance of this work and its alignment with the RTP, we do expect to provide more frequent updates to this committee over the coming year. So that's all I have prepared for you today. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And if there's time, I'm also very interested to hear about how this data can help support your efforts to seek funding for resilience improvements, and especially if anyone has Protect on the mind, given the existing NOFO that's out now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kate. Looking around here to see, does anyone have any questions or discussion items for Kate? Sure, Karen.
So this is really, really interesting. Thank you. And I know it's top of mind for a lot of agencies. I'm curious, particularly as it relates to like the regional trails that you mentioned. I know for a lot of trail systems, they're intentionally put in like floodplains to take advantage of, you know, an area that's otherwise underutilized, provide a recreational trail. Are you considering that and maybe making recommendations for how to create that like multi-purpose infrastructure that can withstand some of that, and also trying to weigh the impacts of that trail potentially not being available then when it is flooded?
Yeah, that's a really good point and comment. Yeah, I think that is, everything's on the table as we look to develop the plan and not just thinking about how the trails themselves can be more resilient, but I know that, for anyone involved in trail maintenance, that there is a real cost associated with that. And so perhaps highlighting the increased funding required to really maintain some of these trails as well.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Anybody else? Yes, Audrey.
Hi, thanks. This is really interesting. Do you foresee in terms of project types in the future, like a network of green infrastructure being a type of project that might be recommended in order to, help manage, reduce flooding? Or, how does that fit in?
Yes, so green infrastructure will definitely be a focus. And I think, am I understanding your comment correctly, that really focusing on at scale, that network scale, I think that could definitely be on the table.
I can jump into with, you mentioned like how agencies can use this for planning. So yeah, this is great data to have. So we at Lake County DOT, every year we sit down and look at our multi-year program and look to add projects to it. And we have a pretty extensive like evaluation process for that, roadway safety, bike path connectivity, things like that. So this is another data set just to kind of add into that and look at this from that lens. So I definitely see where this data is going to be factored into our process and just help us look at, another data point that we may not notice or realize when you're looking at, hey, are we going to resurface this road, add a bike path? Hey, this is in a flood prone area. Maybe it's one of the only areas that has access to like a community hospital or something like that. And if we raise this bridge up, just provide protection and stuff like that too, or just better access and safety and stuff like that, first responders and everything. So no, that's from our perspective. I think this is going to be great and something that we'll have to consider. And we may come back to you with some questions of how to interpret it and maybe how the best way to apply it and things like that too. I can see, but so yeah, thank you for this. It's great.
Wonderful. Thank you for the feedback.
Any other questions, discussion, comments? All right. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate it. Very informative. Moving on to item 6.03. It's just an informational item for committee members. It's the draft meeting dates that we're looking at for next year. So just looking for any overall thoughts or comments on that. We'll bring it back in December for approval. And just keep in mind, these are tied to, state and federal, timelines and stuff like that for approval of federal funds. So pretty locked in on that front, but just sharing it for information. Another thing to think about too is I know CMAP staff is already starting to work on, and they're going to be looking at the agendas for next year. So if you have any items that you think are off topic, a lot of these that we talked about today are certainly going to be, placed in topics that we continue to discuss next year along with the RTP. But if you have any items that you think would be of relevance for this group to discuss, we may look to have a segment to talk about that at the December meeting. But if not, feel free to reach out and share those to CMAP staff for consideration. All right, moving on to 7, other business. Do we have any other business that committee members would like to bring forward? Yes, Eric.
I just want to mention that PACE is in the process of starting its next phase of its network restructuring project revision. We're looking for public feedback on many of the draft concepts that we've developed. A project website has been updated. It's at pacebus.com/revision. In addition to a network concepts report that provides details on each of the concepts, there's also maps that show what those concepts look like. We also have a survey in both English and Spanish posted on the project website. We encourage people to take that survey. We really are looking for feedback on what people's thoughts are regarding these concepts. We also have 2 upcoming open houses, in-person open houses, one on Monday, December 2nd at the Howard Moore Community Center in Forest Park, and another on Wednesday, December 11th at the Homewood Village Hall. That's also on the project website as well. So I just wanted to mention that material is now available, and then any public feedback we get, we're really hopeful to get that feedback so that we can then take that information and start to develop a draft network plan in early 2025. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and appreciate all the work and effort so far on that revision plan. It's very important. Any other business items today? Seeing none, moving on to public comment. Does anyone from the audience wish to address the committee today? Terry's got anybody? Nope.
Good morning.
Yeah, anyone, 1 second here. Doug, do we have any folks online that wish to address committee? John Paul Jones is, maybe that was.
Yes. Oh, yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thank
I
you,
was
John.
reading- Thank you. Thank you for this. The reports today were just so much on time. There's a lot of conversations taking place around the traffic fatality numbers. And so the report today add value to what the growing concern is that we can now take, even some of the more recent data that you provided today, we can take it back out there to the streets about the challenge before us when it comes to the traffic problems and the fatalities and injuries. People were just simply shocked just last week when we shared with them this tremendous problem we're having with the fatalities. We've been having back-to-back terrible crashes on the south side, particularly for some reason between 75th and 71st Street. It's just always high-level crashes going on, and it has a lot to do with vehicle theft. So we will be looking at ways which we can get the state more involved with how we deal with vehicles exiting the Dan Ryan and driving fast through the Inglewood district. These vehicles. And I also appreciated the conversation today about the resilience question. The Department of Housing, Department of Water Management promised under the new administration to do green infrastructure. We've been waiting for their pilot projects to come forth. They have not even announced them anymore. And so the green infrastructure seems to be something that various city departments are eager to pursue, but yet there's huge delays. And so that resilience plan would add value to giving not only Department of Water, but even Department of Public Health strategies, even Department of Planning strategies of how we're going to deal with some of these trails that we have coming up, as well as some of these road construction initiatives that's underway. And so I really appreciated these conversations this morning, and please keep up the good work.
Thanks, John Paul. We appreciate those comments, and thanks for listening in and checking those things out. I think we have Garland Armstrong. Can you hear us, Garland?
Yes. Good morning, Richard and committees. This is Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines and Elmwood Park, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. I just would like to I'm deeply concerned about the summit station for Metro and Amtrak, because as you know, for people with disabilities, whenever they're coming from Springfield after we had a long day getting off at Summit, there is no address at the Summit station by Center Street in Hanover. And I just would like to know if Amtrak and Metra are working together to put an address there. So like when disability constituents call them and tell them what station stop the train will be pulling in, so that the Pace Paratransit can be there for them, because I've seen others on the Metro that there is no addresses where at different stations. So I just would like to know, has Metro updated all the addresses at every station, or there are some that they missed, like on the Heritage Corridor and then other lines too, so that if Pace Paratransit will be able to pick up those clients from the train, which line they are, and they would like to know the address so they can be in the system, so that the disability constituents doesn't have to take a guess what's address going to be at which station when the train pulls in. So I just would like to know, are they going to be working on that, or what is what, to make sure so that Pace can have it in their Pace Paratransit can have it in their system, and it won't be a lot of confusion and all that mess.
Hello, Garland. This is Brian Stepp from Metra. I don't have an answer to your question with me today, but I will take that back to the team and make sure that we do get back to you with a response.
Okay, Brian, and Pace, just want to make sure that you'll be able to follow up with Metro. So Eric, so you can follow up with Metro to make sure to have their addresses in the system. So especially when the constituents coming from Springfield, that they would like to know what's the address going to be, because sometimes the disability constituents don't have an idea of it. So make sure you do that, because this is a must, so it could be a part of it.
Will do. Thank you, Garland.
Yep. And also too, for CTA two, make sure to have the same thing on every addresses at every station, because there are sometimes that most of them don't even have the idea what's the address going to be at which station they're going to be when the train pulls in.
Great. Thank you, Garland. We appreciate the comment. Nope, sorry, go ahead.
All right. And you have yourself a happy Thanksgiving too. See you next month for the holiday rush.
Thank you, Garland. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. Thank you. Anyone else, Doug, or? Nope. All right. Next meeting will be scheduled for December 20th. Seeing no other business before the committee, do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. Got a motion? Second? All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.